The Legend of the RMS Titanic, Part 3. RMS Titanic is nearly finished. All it needs to do is some good paintwork and some interior working, and she'll be ready to set sail on her maiden voyage. However, we won't be talking about that today. Today, we'll be talking about her interiors. So let's begin. First and foremost, we must talk about Titanic's control center, her bridge, also known as the wheelhouse. The wheelhouse was equipped with many telegraphs, and also it was made with a auxiliary wheel, just in case if the main steering gear failed and the auxiliary gear had to be turned on, in any case of an emergency. This would be Captain Edward John Smith's control center during his time on Titanic. It would also be his last time being seen alive inside this very wheelhouse. Also, although not part of the main bridge, there was also a chart room where Captain Smith and his senior officers would check Titanic's time and her voyage. It was also here that there was also a certain mechanism that would help stop water from flooding into any of the compartments. There were 3 ways to trigger Titanic's watertight doors to close. One was a mechanism on the bridge. This mechanism, also known as a switch, if put on by the officers, it will close all watertight doors automatically. And a light system on the bridge will let them know which compartments are open and which ones are closed. However, there are 2 other ways that trigger these bulkheads to close. One is manually being closed by one of the firemen in said compartment. And the third way, there was a special mechanism that that if any water would trigger a line, it would close the watertight door of that said compartment, flooding the water and not letting any more water flood the rest of the ship. However, Titanic's own bulkheads would be her ultimate fate, but I'll talk about that another time. Then there was the wireless room, handled by 2 radio operators. They would transmit messages from Titanic to other ships and back, even to land if close enough. However, what's known about this was that the Marconi crew was not paid by White Star. It was paid by the wireless company, Marconi, which had invented the wireless system. Basically, the wireless was used to transmit postcards from Titanic to other ships and onto the mainland. This was pretty common back then, and was a luxurious feature, as many passengers would often send messages via the radio operator's room to the mainland. During Titanic's final moments before she struck the fateful iceberg, she was transmitting messages to Cape Race. This is the only known photo of the wireless room, taken by a passenger, who I will explain in a little while. There were 24 boilers on Titanic, several in 6 boiler rooms, 3 of which will be dramatically close to the iceberg collision point. Each boiler had to be stoked numerous times a day by a team known as the Black Gang, who I'll explain in a little while. These would send steam to Titanic's engine room. In the engine room, there were 2 reciprocating engines, each powering the side propeller. There's one handling the starboard, one handling the port, while a turbine was used for the center propeller. Also, there was a fireman's passage right here. This would gain access to the boiler rooms via a fireman's passage from the fireman's quarters. The cargo holds were at the very front of Titanic, right here. Now, between each boiler room was a coal bunker, hold with several tons of coal. The turbine room was located directly after the reciprocating engine room, which would drive power for the center propeller. And after that was the fresh water tanks, filled with fresh water for the passengers. Now, let's move on to Titanic's lavish interiors. On the boat deck, which was which was at the highest point on the ship, except for the funnels, was the gymnasium, handled by a very cheerful gymnast. He would explain many machineries that were on board, including the rowing mechanism and a riding horse. The rowing mechanism would be really useful and to any survivors who would want to row in the lifeboats, as many passengers did in the future to come. On A deck was the first class reading room, which was mostly used for the women, as well as a writing room. This room was connected solely to the dining saloon. The first class dining saloon was the largest room on the ship, and by far the most luxurious. The second most luxurious, to be exact. In this room, meals would be served nearly every day. This specific room could hold up to 554 passengers. There was an original design to have an elegant capped dome in this room. However, this was not used this was used on RMS Lusitania and RMS Mauretania. As I said in parts 1 and part 2, the White Star wanted to be better than Cunard. Also, the first class cabins B-52, B-54, and B-56 had private promenades. One of these cabins would later be taken by J. Bruce Ismay. The Olympic-class liners were the first ever passenger ships in general to have a swimming pool on board. Even though it wasn't luxurious, it was still pretty unique for having a swimming pool on board such a luxurious passenger liner. There was a Ronde Cafe on board Titanic as well, on both sides of the second-class staircase. Even though not as luxurious as most of the features on board Titanic, it was still pretty neat. And this room would feature many scenes in James Cameron's Titanic in 1997. Due to experiences aboard Olympic, the White Star decided to add a Café Parisien on board Titanic on the original B-deck promenade. It was realized that this was not used very much on Olympic, so they decided to use this on Titanic as a Café Parisien. This was the most unique new feature on board Titanic, as well with more 20 cabins, but I'll get to that later. Also on board was the first class smoking room. This was not a unique feature, as this was also featured on many other passenger liners, such as RMS Mauretania and RMS Lusitania, and later RMS Aquitania. Generally, this was a men's-only area, and women would later be in the writing or reading room. Also on board was the first class lounge. Even though this was supposed to mean for female-only section, both men and women would appear in this section of the ship, which was later found on Olympic, and so both men and women were allowed to will be in this specific lounge. And as you can see, it does look quite luxurious. The first-class reception room was also a key feature on the Olympic-class liners. This was a room basically after dinner, as passengers would just sit and talk, eat coffee, or play games. The Olympic reception room was slightly smaller than Titanic's. On both ships, the reception room was located and connected to the dining saloon. A key feature was the promenade decks on the Olympic-class liners, as this made a perfect view to see for the passengers to see the luxurious sea and watch the mighty vessel sail through the waves. Both Olympic and Titanic were popular in first class wise, even though one ship would be different from the other. I will explain that later. The most impressive feature of all on Olympic and Titanic was the grand staircase, capped with an elegant dome. A clock would be on the front, and the grand staircase would be the center for passengers to exit through all the way down to the ship to the dining saloon. The staircase reached from the boat deck all the way down to E deck. There was also a second grand staircase aft between the third and fourth funnels on both ships. Even though this was not as luxurious as the first class staircase in the front section of the ship, it was still pretty handsome. However, this staircase only went down to A, B, and C deck, this deck was used by second-class passengers. The staterooms were the most luxurious features on any passenger liner, and stateroom B58, as seen here on B deck, would be J. Bruce Ismay's suite. Another feature on the Olympic class liners in first class was the squash court. One of the rarest seen photos ever to be seen of the squash court. This would be used for playing squash and for exercise before taking a swim in the swimming pool, as Archibald Gracie would do on Sunday, April 14th, 1912. Another rarely photographed room on Titanic was her first-class barber shop. Here, men could get a shave, and also they could get a haircut. And most importantly, they would get souvenirs, White Star merchandise, tobacco, you name it. It was in this very room. And in color, it did look pretty darn neat. Alright, we're done with first class. Let's get on to second class. And now, let's get on to second class's library. This was kind of like the reading room to per se, as in the many second class passengers will often be here reading books and buying their time on a luxurious ocean liner. It would be here that Lawrence Beasley, a second-class passenger, would buy his time reading books and would be relaxing and talking to fellow passengers. He would be one of the key figures later to be explained in this documentary. As second class wasn't that much luxurious in first class, it was still pretty luxurious, as seen in these postcards of second class staterooms. The second-class section of the boat deck was basically used for second-class passengers only, while the front part was used for first-class passengers. And the poop deck, well, I'll get to that in a minute. Basically, this section of the boat deck was basically used as a children's play area. Fun fact, even though most photographs that are shown taken of what Titanic looked like are actually taken aboard Olympic. But this picture was actually taken on board Titanic herself. But in the library's case, this was taken aboard Olympic. The dining room looked very similar to the first-class dining room, even though less luxurious, but still holded a lot of people. The smoking room was not so luxurious as on the first-class section, but was still pretty darn handsome. Mostly, second class was located midship, between a D and F decks. Now, even though third class was a drastic change from first and second class, it was still pretty luxurious, as many ocean liners back then weren't so careful with third class. It was described as a living hell, but now on Titanic, it was described as a dream. Third class passengers would use the Titanic as a way for it to get to a new life, onto a new world in America. Basically, in this section, White Star holded transportation, not luxury. The third-class dining saloon was located between two bulkheads, on each side of a bulkhead. Even though not as luxurious as second and first, it's still pretty darn neat and pictured photographs and paintings of RMS Titanic and RMS Olympic. The poop deck, the very back of the ship, was used exclusively for third-class passengers, as with the general room, as seen here. In fact, the third class, went all the way from the D deck to the poop deck at the very back of the ship, where the stores were kept. As I said before, staterooms weren't luxurious in third class, but they were considered quite cheapest, as 4 bunk beds could hold up to 4 people. The dining saloon was sometimes used to advertise other ocean liners of the White Star Line, like the Majestic, the Oceanic, you name it. Titanic also had a third-class staircase, not grand, but staircasey. This was used for passengers to get up to the boat deck quickly and onto the open deck. In fact, this is the first time I've ever seen the picture of the third-class staircase, and it looks pretty darn neat. At the very front of the Titanic was her mail room, where 5 clerks were handling the mail. Royal Mail, RMS means Royal Mail Ship, so Titanic was a Royal Mail Ship carrying mail from the UK to America and back again. This was why the mail room was used. The 5 clerks were stationed in this area. The Turkish bath was a great spot in first class on board Titanic, where people would just relax after taking a nice swim in the pool. However, this was one of the very first rooms to be flooded during the Titanic's fate. Third class had it much worse, as gates were closed during the fate of the RMS Titanic. However, we won't be getting to that for a little while. Another thing, the first class smoking rooms on Olympic and Titanic were very different. The smoking room on RMS Titanic had different painting than her sister ship Olympic. Titanic had a painting of Plymouth Harbor, while the one on RMS Olympic in the smoking room, the painting was of Approach to the New World, which just depicted New York Harbor. A minor difference in Titanic and Olympic, but I'll get to that later on. Yes, sirree, Titanic's lavish interiors were quite luxurious for her time. She was considered the most beautiful ship in the world. However, all these rooms will be flooded and will be underwater within 4 days of Titanic's maiden voyage. But that's a story for another day.